We want to make sure that we are using our resources well, that every single cent we received is used for the social purpose that we're trying to achieve. One of our most recent moves and initiatives is actually this thing which we call Grander Together. And there's 3 objectives. First, to promote the benefits of grandparenting. 2, to strengthen intergenerational bonds. And 3, to transmit enduring values. There is a deep importance to all of these values.
Directors in every charity is really making that amount, 15 or 18,000, right? A month. Being a non-profit, I want to ask where the money is going to and how is that being used. Hey, welcome back, everybody. This episode introduces the concept of social sustainability. Whenever we give, it's always about giving for today or tomorrow. But have we thought about giving for generations to come when it comes to community, when it comes to marriages, personal, professional growth? There's a lot that's happening over here. But all this is under a non-profit. So it begs the big question, are non-profits really profitable? And how do they stay afloat? And of course, how you can get involved as a business owner or somebody who's working in your organization. We've got Darius Lee in the studio. He's the Executive Director of Cultivate SG. Darius, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Walk us through what Cultivate SG is all about.
So, a little bit about Cultivate SG. So, we are a non-profit organization, and what we stand for would be to help society to thrive together for generations. And we want to build, broadly speaking, a pro-family society. How do we do that? Few pillars. Number 1, marriage. 2nd, family. 3rd, children. And 4th, social harmony. How do we do that? Through research, education, affiliation, and dialogue. So what we're trying to do is, broadly speaking, to try to build a pro-family society where different generations can thrive together for many, many years to come in a socially sustainable manner.
If you could explain that to me as a layman, what should I be envisioning?
Well, let's look at our current context in Singapore. And I think this is something that many of us are aware of. There are 2 huge demographic challenges that are facing Singapore. First of all, low birth rates. And so that figure hit 0.97 in 2023 and again in 2024. The second issue that is facing us is something that will hit us next year. So by next year, Singapore is projected to become a super aged society.
In 2026, we are going to be a super aged society.
That's right. And what that means is that at least 1 in 5 people will be aged 65 and above. So that, by world standards, means that we are a society that is getting old. So various other challenges like healthcare, pressures on the social support system, things like pressures on families. So you could easily imagine sandwiched families which have to take care of both the young and the old. You would also imagine a shrinking workforce. And I think that will be relevant to many of our listeners today who are running businesses, because we are looking at a society where you might have a situation where you have fewer workers who are able to do the work. Wages might well go up because there are fewer workers around. You might have an aging workforce and so on and so forth. And you might have workers who have to balance work and caregiving, and they might be struggling with that. So we need to find sustainable solutions. So what are some of these? I think when it comes to work, one of the topics that has arisen in recent years in Singapore has been the topic of flexible work arrangements as well as parental leave. Now, these are some of the solutions the government has proposed and some of the solutions that various people in society, employers, employees have been talking about. But these are also things that need to be worked out. Why? Because imagine you have an employee that goes on parental leave. What happens to that workload? That needs to be distributed among the other colleagues. And that could lead to issues of morale. That could lead to issues of perhaps some people feeling that, right, I'm doing so much additional work for no extra pay, perhaps I'm going to leave. Or you might have situations where there might be resentment even among the colleagues themselves. Hey, look, I have to cover your work, and this is not fair, that Edric, perhaps you're not treating me well as a colleague and you're being irresponsible and so on and so forth. Certainly these feelings can build up and you don't want that. So how do we build a society that will be able to sustain itself forward, I think it all boils down to individual attitudes, attitudes of companies, attitudes of families, communities, and so on.
So where does Cultivate really come in for that?
So a lot of what Cultivate's work deals with is about research and proposing solutions. So there are several surveys that we have done last year. So one of the surveys that we did was the topic of parenthood and work. This was released just before the National Day rally last year, and it was in time for many of the announcements. And of course, it was relevant to many of the announcements as well. Basically, what we found was that people did struggle in terms of balancing parenthood and work. People did feel like they needed more parental leave. And that was a welcome announcement by the Prime Minister when it came up that there were some changes to the parental leave scheme with a new shared parental leave scheme. And so what we did back then was to help to unpack some of the feelings that people had towards some of these topics. And hopefully we begin to build a socially sustainable way forward when it comes to many of these topics.
Apart from doing all the research, right, that's actually been, I think, for the government side, it's being done. So when Cultivate comes in, do you actually work with the government to be able to bolster that? Or are you speaking from the ground up with more of the grassroots kind of an approach and making that happen within sub-communities within the workforce?
So for us, a lot of our proposals have gone straight to the government, and we've had dialogues with the government on many issues. And another topic that we have been engaging with the government on has been the topic of online harms. So remember, we had 4 pillars to our work: marriage, family, children, and social harmony. So this falls within the idea of social harmony. So how do we talk about these issues? I think in the online space, that was what we were concerned about. We have published with the mainstream media as well. So you could find some of my writings on various topics, ranging from discrimination against parents to online harms in the Straits Times. Hopefully, then we begin to start a conversation. And what we hope to do, and that is our tagline, to grow the good, one conversation at a time.
And what are the more recent conversations that you've been having?
So some of the more recent conversations that we've been having are broadly along the lines of family and success. And we've also had conversations with the government on the topic of large families. So on the topic of family and success, and this is a little bit of a heads up as to what we're going to be talking about at our conference this year. What we are looking at is the concept of success in Singapore, and whether or not this is antithetical to the family or whether or not this has helped families to flourish. And what we find that in Singapore, many of our attitudes towards success are very much rooted in things like perhaps academic performance, work performance. And when it comes to family, if you recall the 5 C's from the 90s, children wasn't one of the 5 C's. But these were markers of material success, more or less. But they were not markers of success in a more holistic manner, in a more moral fashion, perhaps in a more societal fashion. And so what we hope to change is perhaps to bring us towards understanding how can society thrive? How can our notions of success help that idea of societal thriving?
Nobody just goes, hey, I'm going to start a nonprofit and just do it. So what went through your mind, and what were the problems that you saw that says, hey, I really have to do this?
So for me, family is something close to my heart. I'm a father, I'm married, I have 2 children. And so this, from a personal perspective, is something which is very relevant. But at the same time, I see the benefit of families for society. And that was something that I was writing about, I was advocating for, even before joining Cultivate SG. So a little bit of the background as to how Cultivate SG started. Back in 2020, there were essentially a group of people who came together, and they were essentially concerned about the topic of family. And they approached me and said, we'd like to start this. Would you like to join us? And I said yes, because again, this was something close to my heart. So then we started that whole process of trying to start this new organization, Cultivate SG. A little bit about the legal landscape and the framework as to how nonprofits are characterized in Singapore. Now, the term nonprofit is not a legal term of art in Singapore, but I think it's useful to help us understand a little bit the distinction between what a nonprofit is and what a not-for-profit is based on what US law says. So in the United States, they draw a distinction between nonprofits and not-for-profit. So a nonprofit organization is one that basically serves a societal benefit beyond a profitable purpose, whereas a not-for-profit is something which is much smaller, perhaps serves its members particularly. So a parent-teacher organization might be something that is a not-for-profit because it serves the parents and teachers and perhaps students as well. They may hold profitable events such as bake sales and so on, and they are much smaller than what you might imagine, perhaps what we would call a charity. So a little bit about the Singapore framework. Essentially, you can think of it as 3 tiers. So the first tier is to register the entity itself. There are 3 different kinds of vehicles that you can adopt. One is called a company limited by guarantee. The other is a registered society. And the third one is called a trust. Now, more common are the first 2, company limited by guarantee as well as registered society. Then the next tier that you bring it to is to upgrade it to a charity. So when you register one of these entities as a charity, of course, you must fulfill a charitable purpose. And as a result of that, you are tax exempt. There's a third tier to this, and that's the highest possible tier. It is called an institution of a public character, an IPC. So what distinguishes a charity from an IPC would be that an IPC, not only is it tax exempt, donors get 250% tax exemption. You can think about it. Of course, there are heightened corporate compliance and regulatory requirements that would have to be complied with by IPCs, but that is essentially it. So for us, in a nutshell, why did we decide to bring it down this road of a nonprofit and then, of course, submit an application to register as a charity? Is because we felt that what we are doing is going to have a huge societal impact, and we feel that this is something which is beneficial for the community at large.
When you say that you're moving toward becoming a charity, right? What is it that I would say that constitutes Cultivate SG into the charity framework?
So in Singapore, there are some established categories for registration as a charity. And these go back to very, very old English law from which we got our laws from. And so these would be things like advancement of education, alleviation of poverty, various other kinds of societal and community benefits. And I think looking at the landscape in Singapore and the challenges that I've highlighted, I think Cultivate occupies a very interesting space of speaking into that because we are speaking to some of the deepest and most profound kind of challenges that are facing not just individual families, but also the society at large with the demographic challenges that I've just highlighted. So with those kinds of challenges, I think we need people to come in there to bring constructive solutions, to also have societal programs and activities and so on. So one of our most recent moves and initiatives is actually this thing which we call Grander Together. So it is our new initiative that we're hoping to build stronger intergenerational families in Singapore. And there's 3 objectives. First, to promote the benefits of grandparenting. Why? Because we felt that we really need to recognize grandparents and the extended family as part of the family. 2, to strengthen intergenerational bonds. And 3, to transmit enduring values. So these are values that we felt are necessary because we studied the landscape and we realized that this was one topic that, frankly speaking, not a lot of people had talked about. And even when most people talk about family, they often think about parents and children. They often think about children being up to the age 18, maybe sometimes 21, but they're not thinking of adult children, for example. And when they think of parents, they're not realizing that grandparents are also parents. They're parents of adult children, and they are grandparents of another generation below them, and perhaps even down the line, great-grandparents and so on and so forth. Now, of course, that is becoming increasingly rare in Singapore because fewer people are marrying later, and so on and so forth. But again, we realize that there is a deep importance to all of these values.
How do you think corporates can get involved in this? You know, there are so many different facets of altruism, and how can now somebody be part of that impact that Cultivate SG is looking to make?
So, of course, the easiest and perhaps most straightforward way that corporates can be involved is to donate to organizations, nonprofit organizations, charities, institutions of a public character. I think there are already many, many donations out there. So that's definitely one of the ways that they can support. Other forms of support would be availing, for example, your staff to attend some of these events that are organized, or to support in kind. So, for example, if you have a huge auditorium that is not very frequently used, you might decide that perhaps I would just loan it to one of these organizations and they can have their events at that auditorium. So these are some practical ways to support. But I think moving forward, what I'm seeing more and more organizations doing is also this. So, for example, having a lunch talk to educate people on certain values, on certain ideas, and well, it could be something that staff can get involved in. So it could be something about how do you be a better parent? How do you build stronger relationships with your family? How do you manage challenges such as, for example, your children's screen time, if they're spending too much time on their phones, watching TV, on the computers, and so on and so forth. So talks like these. So inviting organizations to do that. And another example that I've heard is not from Cultivate, but actually from Dads for Life. And they have an initiative called the Eat with Your Family Day. That has been quite successful, and I've heard of organizations which allow the staff to go back early, let's say on Fridays, to go home and eat with their families. So they might eat out, they might eat at home, but these are initiatives where corporates can get involved. Yes, of course, there might be some sort of resistance, perhaps from some people, to feel like, all right, eat with your family day. Does that mean that everybody has to finish their work earlier? Does that mean that I need to rush my staff?
No, typically Singaporean is eat with my family day. The company pay for my dinner, is it, with the family?
Well, if companies want to do that, feel free to do that. But yeah, I would hope that that is the only problem they struggle with.
No, I mean, I'm telling you, if that initiative were available, man, that people will snap it up, because I get to leave earlier on Friday and a free meal. You know, most of the time, I mean, there are some companies that actually like give out credits for staff luncheons. So extending that to family would be, yeah, cost gets higher, but does that help to motivate and create the culture that we're looking for? I mean, what do you think?
Well, what I've heard from past and present CEOs of Dads for Life would be that, yes, of course it does. What happens, in fact, is morale goes up. And when you have staff who have high morale and things are happier, things are better at home, generally speaking, they become more productive. So it's not as if keeping a staff and working them necessarily all the time is good, it's necessarily more productive. Sometimes investing in your staff, showing that you care about them and their personal lives, about their welfare, this boosts morale, and in turn, they reciprocate. And I think that is something which we want to build into our culture, because work is not just about meeting deadlines, meeting KPIs and everything like that. But if you show you really care, people will reciprocate.
That is very true. I mean, when we're talking about the money and all that, right? Again, being a non-profit, now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about not so much of where the money is coming from, right? But I want to ask where the money is going to and how is that being used. I think many people will always be a little bit wary, you know, when it comes to non-profit or charities, because of certain situations that we've had before. For example, just embezzlement or misuse of funds. Do you think that for your side, right, being a small outfit, does that make it easier to actually put the guardrails there, or are you already setting the guardrails based on, let's say, for example, having a community of 200 people or stakeholders that you already have?
I think with any organization, you always have to put guardrails from day one, because these are habits for individual staff, for myself included, for the board members, and so on. So we need to put the guardrails from day one and inculcate the right habits of accountability, transparency, and so on. So how do we put these guardrails in place? There are a few things we do. For one, whenever there are donations that are sent our way, we keep track of them. We send email acknowledgements. We keep track of every single amount, every single cent that goes in or out. So accounting and proper acknowledgement. Another aspect of it is about transparency. So most of our work is visible online. For work that is private and confidential, of course, let's say private discussions and dialogues with the government, we cannot disclose that. But of course, we maintain that level of privacy and confidentiality. So we are transparent about what we are doing, and it's pretty clear where the money is being used and how the money is being used. And I think beyond that, it is also about a sense of wanting to make sure that we use whatever amounts that we receive judiciously. So what does that mean? It means that we don't just take the money, sit on it, and do nothing. It also doesn't mean spending beyond our means, but what we try to do is to keep as low a surplus from year to year. And why do we do that? That's because we want to make sure that we are using our resources well, that every single cent we received is used for the social purpose that we're trying to achieve. And when it comes to the next year, we do fundraising for that year. Because each year, if you think about the nonprofit sector and seeking funds from donors, it is a little bit like a cycle. You present the work that you've done, you present the vision that you have, you present what you plan to do, and you appeal for funds. If they agree with that vision, if they agree with what you're trying to do, they support you. And then you carry that out, and the cycle repeats again. So that idea of trust is important to build. So what I think we treat with utmost care is this idea of trust, is this idea of social capital, to make sure that we are accountable to every single donor for what we do with the funds. If they raise questions, we answer them.
Right. Are these regular town hall meetings that you actually have with your donors? Or is that part of an annual report they actually give them?
So what we do is we send regular newsletters to update them about the kinds of work that we've been doing. And it's all there. Every single thing is there. Of course, we don't disclose exactly how much was used for each thing, but it's something that if you work backwards, you could figure out.
Something that was always very, I think it's on the back of everybody's mind, which is when we run a nonprofit or a charity, we have to pay our staff. And salaries based on certain brackets can be high. Some of them can be manageable and understandable. So that's always been the tricky part of the justification. When we talked about that off air, it was about there's a standard rate, I think, right? Or a standard range that is governed by or given by government guidelines?
Yes, correct. That is the National Council of Social Service Guidelines.
Yeah.
They release that every single year, and that sets out the benchmark for the social service sector.
Right. So, okay. So here's the thing. I want to bust the myth that just because you're at a C level or a director level, right, means that you're making big bucks, because there's a range and it goes up to 15 or 18,000, right, a month in terms of, I'm going to have to fact check this, but does that necessarily mean that directors in every charity is really making that amount, as in that is the tier, or is it possible that they actually take less depending on the amount of fundraising that happens?
So the truth of that is they probably would be taking less, or at least I'm not making $15,000 a month or something like that, or 18,000. What happens under the guidelines? So just to run through the guidelines a little bit is that depending on the tier, depending on the size of the charity, so of course, depending on how much donations they receive per year. So it's something like this. If it receives more than 1 million, it will be a certain bracket. If it's less than 1 million, it will be a certain bracket, and so on and so forth. So there are certain benchmarks that are set by the government for this. Now, these are guidelines. They are not something that we are strictly bound by, but we try our best to follow them. And that is something that guides us in terms of how much the various staff should be given in terms of salary as well. So we try to be as fair as possible and to try to follow those guidelines as closely as possible.
Yeah, but I got to ask, because you guys are a small outfit, so with the startup mentality, right, it's like from month to month, sometimes it can fluctuate. Does that happen at Cultivate SG? It goes like, okay, guys, this month we're taking about 50% less. So so instead of, McDonald's, you're going to eat bak chor mee already.
No, well, For us, thankfully, that hasn't happened, and hopefully will not happen.
It's been happening to me. So
So what happens is, of course, we do our annual budgets, and we keep track of how much money that we will need for each month, from month to month. And there are various ways, of course, that we can keep track of those funds. Of course, just by looking at the bank statements, just by projecting. So for us, thankfully, and for me, thankfully, the board members have been very, very proactive and, of course, very, very judicious with how they appeal for funds. And also, kind of, there's this dynamic, of course, as the executive director, when it comes to spending, I will have to get approval from the board. So sometimes there's a bit of back and forth. Sometimes I will need to justify to them how I'm using the funds and to get approvals for certain huge purchases, for example. So these are things that there are guardrails in place, and there's an ongoing dialogue, perhaps you might consider, between myself and the board as to, all right, do we have enough funds for this year? Do we need to raise more funds? Do we need to perhaps do a little bit more fundraising or a little bit less fundraising for this period and focus more on other things? So there is this ongoing dialogue to make sure that, all right, we are constantly healthy in terms of our funds. And if we project some additional expenses, perhaps we do the fundraising necessary to get that.
yeah, that begs the question: who are the watchdogs in here?
I think there are several layers of watchdogs, of course. For every single non-profit organization out there, of course, the first pair of eyes would be somebody in my shoes. So the executive director. The second pair of eyes, I think, would come from the board themselves. And I think for every single organization, this is the critical part of the entire thing. For organizations that have gone south, very often the board has had some kinds of missteps. The boards have not really exercised that kind of oversight that well. So the board members, I think each and every director has the role to play in scrutinizing the accounts, asking the right questions, perhaps pushing back on the direction being proposed by the executive director, if necessary, or the CEO, if necessary, and to remove certain people, if necessary, in order to instill some sense of discipline, accountability, and so on and so forth.
Aren't there any third-party audits that come in?
Yes. So we audit our accounts. So that's, again, another pair of eyes. So every single year, we submit our accounts for audit, and that is to be filed with the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority, with the government. And finally, I think the final pair of eyes, you might say, would be the public at large. I think they have a right and the duty to report it. And so just go ahead, raise the report. And of course, we can think about people who are whistleblowers in organizations as well. They can always report it as well. So things like that would be essential to make sure that we maintain a high trust society.
Do you think you'd be able to tell me a little bit more about some of the programs or events that might be coming up that more of our listeners or viewers will be able to start participating in as well?
Okay, well, so something big that we'll be doing this year is our flagship annual conference. So we had a first run last year, and we're doing it again this year. It is called the Unfiltered Conference. And our topic this year is the family on trial. And I've alluded to it a little bit just now. Our focus is on the topic of success and family that will be held on 17th of November this year. But also in November, I'll be speaking at another conference, and I think this one you're aware of. So this is the Men's Forum 2 conference. This is the second iteration of it. And I'll be speaking on the topic of the state of the family. It's focusing on men, and I'll be focusing, of course, on the male perspective when it comes to family, either as a husband, a father, and so on and so forth. And I'll be talking a little bit generally, perhaps, as well as specifically about some of the trends that we're seeing when it comes to family in Singapore, particularly when it pertains to men. And I think just to hint at where I'm going, if you look at the landscape in Singapore, when it comes to male and female roles in the family, I think there is a significant part of the population where attitudes might still be along the lines that, well, it is the role of the man to work. It is not the role of the man to take care of children, for example. And I think that could be part of the challenge when it comes to our whole talk about fertility rates and caregiving. Now, I think my perspective is that Yes, there are differences between men and women. Yes, there are unique contributions that men and women can bring to either to work or to the family or to public life or private life. But when it comes to something like taking care of children, I think both of them have unique contributions to bring, right? Children need both a mother and a father, and it would really help if both parents could be involved in their children's lives.
And before we end the podcast, I tend to do a very quick questionnaire, a rapid fire one with all my guests. Question number one word that you love.
Love.
One word that you strongly dislike.
Disillusionment.
What sparks joy in the work that you do?
Just really seeking the welfare of children.
What is your routine for peak performance daily?
Wake up early, exercise in the morning, doing my quiet time, and then starting the day from there.
What do you do when negativity or sadness hits you?
Spend time alone, think, pray, reflect, and perhaps even go out for a run.
If you could have a conversation with anybody, dead or alive, fictional, non-fictional, who would that be?
This sounds a little bit facetious, but perhaps Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars.
What's a phrase or quote that has left the biggest impact on you?
What is truth?
What's a harsh lesson that life has taught you?
Failure.
And what's the lesson that it taught you?
That I'm worth more than what I do.
What happens to your work after you've moved on?
So the work at Cultivate, after I've moved on, I hope that it continues, and I hope that it goes to greater heights than whatever I've been able to do.
How do you want to be remembered? What's your legacy?
I want to be remembered, most importantly, by my children as a good father.
Thank you so much for that. The podcast was really very interesting for me because I get to hear from your perspective about the various kinds of impact that we're making. And again, this particular season is all about that impact, big or small, and how it eventually trickles down to something much, much bigger. It's like that single drop of water, eventually creates the ocean. I'm not even sure whether that quote is correct, but whatever, you get the idea. I've heard a lot, and I really hope that more people can go to Cultivate SG and find out how they can contribute. And of course, that being said, I got to give a shout out to everybody who's listening or watching, that both he and I will be speaking at the Men's Forum too, and that's going to be in November, so check it out. I'll be speaking on content creation for senior men. So I don't know why I'm placed in the senior category, but yeah, I'm going to be there. Okay, so if you're interested in doing something like that, please make sure that you join us for that. And of course, as always, check out Darius on LinkedIn, connect with him, go to Cultivate SG, follow them on their social media channels, and of course, continue to listen and watch the podcast and subscribe. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
We want to make sure that we are using our resources well, that every single cent we received is used for the social purpose that we're trying to achieve. One of our most recent moves and initiatives is actually this thing, which we call Grander Together. And there's 3 objectives. First, to promote the benefits of grandparenting. 2, to strengthen intergenerational bonds. And 3, to transmit enduring values. There is a deep importance to all of these values.
Directors in every charity is really making that amount, 15 or 18,000, right? A month. Being a non-profit, I want to ask where the money is going to and how is that being used.